I would like to offer an amendment subject to LCO technical and conforming changes on this particular JFS language. And this amendment would basically be adding back in section 16, which was deleted, which states that any person who knowingly possesses, sells, or delivers medication dispensed or prescribed for aid in dying for any purposes other than delivering such medication to a qualified patient or returning such medication in accordance with section 11 of the act shall be guilty of a Class D felony, and that nothing in the other sections inclusive of this act shall preclude criminal prosecution under any provision of the law for conduct that is inconsistent. And I move this because I think it's very important if this bill passes as an added measure of safety. We are talking about people that could be in possession of medications that are off-label from the FDA. They are intended for a patient to use, to take as a cocktail to terminate their life. And if someone is using these medications in another way, they are out available that can, again, kill you. And therefore, this is an added measure of safety that should absolutely be in this bill. We are talking about drugs that are deadly, and if used improperly, could not only kill somebody who is not on the end of their life, but could cause severe and unchangeable consequences should someone take them improperly. So I think that this is critical to have in this bill, should this bill move forward. Okay, great. So there's been a lot of back and forth on this amendment, and I can assure you there are other reasons that I think that this bill should be looked at in judiciary that have nothing to do with this. But that's here nor there, that's for screening. I think that when we are passing a bill of this nature that is talking about life and death of patients, that we're going to be putting medications, again, that are off-label, that are not intended for this purpose, in high doses that are deadly, we absolutely have to include this language as an added measure of safety. We've done that before when we passed opiate bills. We have stuff right in there talking about if you are in possession, blah, 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 and you do this, it is a felony. These are things that have been done before. So I can't understand why, if this bill is so important, which it is to so many, why we're not putting that in there as an added measure of safety. And I would encourage everyone who is watching this today or is going to vote in support of this. If you vote in support of this amendment, you can still vote in support of the bill and it can still pass out of committee. I do not understand why we are not adding this as a safety measure, which is really critical to provide assurance that these drugs, God forbid, if they get into the wrong hands or are used in the wrong way, that people are held appropriately accountable. So I think that we have heard a lot about that this language is tighter than other states. We're adding more witnesses, for example. That's irrelevant to what this particular section does. If we truly are trying to be a little bit more diligent than other states in providing stopgap measures and safety measures, we absolutely should have this in there. And I feel very strongly, regardless of how you feel about the bill itself, that not putting this in there makes the safety aspects of this shallow, to say the least. And I encourage everyone to support this amendment, which was in the original bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to start my statements by saying that clearly the emotions are running high on this particular bill, that I do agree. This is a difficult decision for many of the people on this committee, which I think is why in other states that we've heard people refer to, Washington, and I think it is, Oregon and Washington, both states made the decision to send it as a referendum so every citizen had an opportunity to weigh in, and the merits of the bills and the process had a longer time to be debated amongst the citizens of those states. And the other state that passed, Vermont, that went through a legal overview through their judiciary committee. And some of our neighboring states like Massachusetts have had this on the referendum, and it has failed. But I do want to say that the hearings that we've heard for years now are always very emotional. It is impossible to not be impacted by some of the stories that we hear, and they're heartbreaking to hear in many cases. That being said, when we hear people saying that the legislature needs to do the right thing, I believe that there are people that have a difference of opinion on what that right thing is. Is it the right thing to pass a bill to help aid in ending life? Or is it the right thing to talk about the services and the care that we provide at the end of life? So I don't think either way how people vote on this is necessarily a right way or a wrong way. So I do take exception to some of those broad statements that if someone is not supportive of this bill, that they are not doing the right thing. And if they are supportive, that they are doing the right thing. So I wanted to say a couple other things. First of all, personally, I am not someone who has not been present during death of loved ones, who has not experienced some of the voids in hospice care, et cetera, at the end of life. And I do believe that those can be fixed. I believe that there is some inconsistency in this bill in the fact that even if you believe it's sound philosophically, I don't believe it's sound practically. And there are too many loopholes that are still available in opportunities for abuses. And we've seen those abuses in other countries. Just 2 minutes ago, this body was not willing to add original language for an added measure of safety to ensure that these deadly drugs that are cocktails that are off-label, they are not indicated for this use, would be made sure and clear within this legislation that someone abusing them would be considered a Class D felon. So I find that there are many loopholes that need to be tightened up. And I think that there are undeniable implications for vulnerable populations and for those with special needs to this bill. Undeniable. Every single national group that represents those with disabilities are against this bill. I think the focus should be on a clear foundation of improvement for the quality of hospice care and palliative care. Palliative care is the emotional and spiritual care for, excuse me, a person when a cure is not possible for their disease. It doesn't hasten or postpone death, and it provides and minimizes suffering at the end of life. We have an opportunity to focus there rather than creating a whole other system, which to me does not have adequate safeguards to protect life and protect the use of these dangerous drugs, again, off-label by FDA, to be used to end life. Another one of my concerns, which I think is very valid and needs attention, is that most doctors are not trained in palliative care. They are not trained in end-of-life options. And therefore, I think they should be required to have that type of training before they are allowed, should they choose, to participate in aid in dying, which I call assisted suicide. Other people do not. That's how I see it. Most don't have it. And therefore, if they don't have that kind of training, I don't think that they can properly provide alternatives for their patients. If they don't have the training, how do they provide those options for patients? And most MDs do not have the expertise or the specific training to make the decision whether someone is mentally, has the mental capacity to make this type of decision. And therefore, allowing a social worker to do that in this bill, to me, is reckless. That is something that is outside the scope of practice, and that should be addressed. I believe that there are opportunities to ensure some of the stories that we have heard are taken care of with a focus on end of life and palliative care and improving those. And that's something that in public health we should be committed to doing. I believe that the safeguards in this bill, especially with what we've just seen in the last 5 minutes, are hollow and need to be addressed. And in closing, I would say that it is so hard to do this, but it is really important that when we pass legislation, that we are doing it without basing it on emotions. And that's very hard to do in this circumstance, but that we are doing and creating policies that are sound for the citizens and provide the adequate safety net that people need in making these difficult decisions. And I wanted to make sure that I was able to say that before we take this vote on this bill. And if this bill passes today, which I am assuming it will out of this committee, I do not see any reason why it should not, if it's that great of a bill and written so well, it needs to have judiciary take a look at it. And maybe that will happen in the screening process, because there are things in this bill like the death certificate. We are redefining what suicide is, the definition. We are allowing someone to end their life by an overdose of drugs off label. And we are putting on their death certificate that their death is from aid in dying. To me, that's semantics. The reason that they will be dying is from an overdose of drugs. And I think those things need to go through the legal process, or at least have our committee, our judiciary committee, look at that. I'm not sure what we are afraid of to not be able to send it there. So I will make that case in screening, should this come up on the agenda. But I wanted people to know I've thought long and hard about this. And I think that we can all conceptually understand what it may be like to be faced with these choices in a terminal disease ourselves or for our loved ones. And I understand that, but I think this bill is not the way to go about it. There's too many things in this bill that I think are wrong. I've heard from constituents that support it and other constituents that do not support it. And I think given a different perspective on what we can do to improve the end of life for some would be a better way to go. If you look at how other countries work in this area, it has been quite a slippery slope in places like Holland and Australia. But in those countries, you are not sending somebody home with a medication that does not have a chain of custody. It is controlled with a physician, with sometimes a nurse present. The patient is asked right before they take an injection if they still want to do this, not 6 months before. And I think that the general public has an idea and is supportive of this concept, but when you talk to them about what is in this bill, they change their mind. They have a difference of opinion. And so I think we need a lot more work here before we pass this. And I would urge those on the committee to think about that when you cast your vote today. I realize that a vote yes today at a committee does not mean that you will support this should it come to the floor, but I will be a no today on this bill. Thank you.